Do you think I am made of stone?" she shouted back, striding towards her mother. "No, it's impossible," said Madame Levi in a convinced tone. "You go and see, mother," retorted Susan, looking at her with blazing eyes. "There's no mercy in heaven, no justice. No, I did not know. Do you think I have no heart? Do you think I have never heard people jeering at me, pitying me, wondering at me? Do you know how some of them were calling me? The mother of idiots, that was my nickname. And my children never would know me, never speak to me. They would know nothing, neither men nor God. Haven't I prayed? But the Mother of God herself would not hear me. A mother! Who is accursed, I or the man who is dead, eh? Tell me. I took care of myself. Do you think I would defy the anger of God and have my house full of those things that are worse than animals who know the hand that feeds them? Who blasphemed in the night at the very church door? Was it I? I only wept and prayed for mercy, and I feel the curse at every moment of the day. I see it round me from morning to night. I've got to keep them alive, to take care of my misfortune and shame. And he would come. I begged him and heaven for mercy. No. Then we shall see. He came this evening. I thought to myself, ah, again. I had my long scissors. I heard him shouting. I saw him near. I must I? Then take! And I struck him in the throat above the breastbone. I never heard him even sigh. I left him standing. It was a minute ago. How did I come here? Madame Levi shivered. A wave of cold ran down her back, down her fat arms, under her tight sleeves, made her stamp gently where she stood. Quivers ran over the broad cheeks, across the thin lips, ran amongst the wrinkles at the corners of her steady old eyes. She stammered, "You wicked woman! You disgraced me! But there, you always resembled your father. What do you think will become of you in the other world? In this? Oh, misery!" She was very hot now. She felt burning inside. She wrung her perspiring hands and suddenly, starting in great haste, began to look for her big shawl and umbrella feverishly, never once glancing at her daughter, who stood in the middle of the room, following her with a gaze distracted and cold. "Nothing worse than in this," said Susan. Her mother, umbrella in hand and trailing the shawl over the floor, groaned profoundly. "I must go to the priest," she burst out passionately. "I do not know whether you even speak the truth. You are a horrible woman. They will find you anywhere. You may stay here or go. There is no room for you in this world." Ready now to depart, she yet wandered aimlessly about the room, putting the bottles on the shelf, trying to fit with trembling hands the covers on cardboard boxes. Whenever the real sense of what she had heard emerged for a second from the haze of her thoughts, she would fancy that something had exploded in her brain without, unfortunately, bursting her head to pieces, which would have been a relief. She blew the candles out one by one without knowing it, and was horribly startled by the darkness. She fell on a bench and began to whimper. After a while she ceased and sat listening to the breathing of her daughter, whom she could hardly see, still and upright, giving no other sign of life. She was becoming old rapidly at last during those minutes. She spoke in tones unsteady, cut about by the rattle of teeth like one shaken by a deadly cold fit of ague. "I wish you had died little. I will never dare to show my old head in the sunshine again. There are worse misfortunes than idiot children. I wish you had been born to me simple like your own." She saw the figure of her daughter pass before the faint and livid clearness of a window, Then it appeared in the doorway for a second, and the door swung to with a clang. Madame Levi, as if awakened by the noise from a long nightmare, rushed out. "Suzanne!" she shouted from the doorstep. She heard a stone roll a long time down the declivity of the rocky beach above the sands. She stepped forward cautiously, one hand on the wall of the house, and peered down into the smooth darkness of the empty bay. Once again she cried, "Suzanne, you will kill yourself there!" The stone had taken its last leap in the dark, and she heard nothing now. A sudden thought seemed to strangle her, and she called no more. She turned her back upon the black silence of the pit, and went up the lane towards Plumard, stumbling along with solemn determination, as if she had started on a desperate journey that would last, perhaps, to the end of her life. A sullen and periodic clamor of waves rolling over reefs followed her far inland, between the high hedges sheltering the gloomy solitude of the fields. Susan had run out, swerving sharp to the left at the door, and on the edge of the slope crouched down behind a boulder. A dislodged stone went on downwards, rattling as it leaped. When Madame Levi called out, Susan could have, by stretching her hand, touched her mother's skirt, had she had the courage to move a limb. She saw the old woman go away, and she remained still, closing her eyes and pressing her side to the hard and rugged surface of the rock. After a while, a familiar face with fixed eyes and an open mouth became visible in the intense obscurity amongst the boulders. She uttered a low cry and stood up. The face vanished, leaving her to gasp and shiver alone in the wilderness of stone heaps. But as soon as she had crouched down again to rest with her head against the rock, the face returned, came very near, appeared eager to finish the speech that had been cut short by death only a moment ago. She scrambled quickly to her feet and said, "Go away, or I will do it again." The thing wavered, swung to the right, to the left. She moved this way and that, stepped back, fancied herself screaming at it, and was appalled by the unbroken stillness of the night. She tottered on the brink, felt the steep declivity under her feet, and rushed down blindly to save herself from a headlong fall. The shingle seemed to wake up. The pebbles began to roll before her, pursued her from above, raced down with her on both sides, rolling past with an increasing clatter. In the peace of the night, the noise grew, deepening to a rumor, continuous and violent, as if the whole semicircle of the stony beach had started to tumble down into the bay. Susan's feet hardly touched the slope that seemed to run down with her. At the bottom she stumbled, shot forward, throwing her arms out, and fell heavily. She jumped up at once and turned swiftly to look back, her clenched hands full of sand she had clutched in her fall. The face was there, keeping its distance, visible in its own sheen that made a pale stain in the night. She shouted, "Go away!" She shouted at it with pain, with fear, with all the rage of that useless stab that could not keep him quiet, keep him out of her sight. What did he want now? He was dead. Dead men have no children. Would he never leave her alone? She shrieked at it, waved her outstretched hands. She seemed to feel the breath of parted lips, and with a long cry of discouragement fled across the level bottom of the bay. She ran lightly, unaware of any effort of her body. High, sharp rocks that, when the bay is full, show above the glittering plain of blue water like pointed towers of submerged churches, glided past her, rushing to the land at a tremendous pace. To the left, in the distance, she could see something shining, a broad disk of light in which narrow shadows pivoted round the center like the spokes of a wheel. She heard a voice calling, "Hey, there!" and answered with a wild scream. So he could call yet. He was calling after her to stop. Never! She tore through the night, past the startled group of seaweed gatherers who stood round their lantern, paralyzed with fear at the unearthly screech coming from that fleeing shadow. The men leaned on their pitchforks, staring fearfully. A woman fell on her knees and, crossing herself, began to pray aloud. A little girl, with her ragged skirt full of slimy seaweed, began to sob despairingly, lugging her soaked burden close to the man who carried the light. Somebody said, "The thing ran out towards the sea." Another voice exclaimed, "And the sea is coming back. Look at the spreading puddles. Do you hear? You woman there! Get up!" Several voices cried together, "Yes, let us be off. Let the accursed thing go to the sea." They moved on, keeping close round the light. Suddenly a man swore loudly. He would go and see what was the matter. It had been a woman's voice. He would go. There were shrill protests from women, but his high form detached itself from the group and went off running. They sent an unanimous call of scared voices after him. A word insulting and mocking came back, thrown at them through darkness. A woman moaned. An old man said gravely, "Such things ought to be left alone." They went on slower, shuffling in the yielding sand and whispering to one another that Milot feared nothing, having no religion, but that it would end badly some day. Susan met the incoming tide by the Raven Islet and stopped, panting, with her feet in the water. She heard the murmur and felt the cold caress of the sea, and calmer now could see the somber and confused mass of the Raven on one side, and on the other the long white streak of molaan sands that are left high above the dry bottom of Fougere Bay at every ebb. She turned round and saw far away along the starred background of the sky the ragged outline of the coast. Above it, nearly facing her, appeared the tower of Plumard Church, a slender and tall pyramid shooting up dark and pointed into the clustered glitter of the stars. She felt strangely calm. She knew where she was, and she began to remember how she came there and why. She peered into the smooth obscurity near her. She was alone. There was nothing there, nothing near her, either living or dead. The tide was creeping in quietly, putting out long, impatient arms of strange rivulets that ran towards the land between ridges of sand. Under the night the pools grew bigger with mysterious rapidity, while the great sea, yet far off, thundered in a regular rhythm along the indistinct line of the horizon. Susan splashed her way back for a few yards, without being able to get clear of the water that murmured tenderly all around, and suddenly, with a spiteful gurgle, nearly took her off her feet. Her heart thumped with fear. This place was too big and too empty to die in. Tomorrow they would do with her what they liked. But before she died, she must tell them. Tell the gentleman in black clothes that there are things no woman can bear. She must explain how it happened. She splashed through a pool, getting wet to the waist, too preoccupied to care. She must explain. He came in the same way as ever and said just so, "Do you think I am going to leave the land to those people from Morbihan that I don't know? Do you? We shall see. Come along, you creature of mischance." And he put his arms out. "Then, monsieur," I said, "before God, never. And he said, striding at me with open palms, "There is no God to hold me. Do you understand, you useless carcass? I will do what I like." And he took me by the shoulders. Then I, monsieur, called to God for help, and next minute, while he was shaking me, I felt my long scissors in my hand. His shirt was unbuttoned, and by the candlelight I saw the hollow of his throat. I cried, "Let go!" He was crushing my shoulders. He was strong, my man was. Then I thought, no, must I? Then take! And I struck in the hollow place. I never saw him fall. Never, never, never saw him fall. The old father never turned his head. He is deaf and childish, gentlemen. Nobody saw him fall. I ran out. Nobody saw. She had been scrambling amongst the boulders of the Raven, and now found herself all out of breath standing amongst the heavy shadows of the rocky islet. The Raven is connected with the mainland by a natural pier of immense and slippery stones. She intended to return home that way. Was he still standing there? At home? Home! 4 idiots and a corpse. She must go back and explain. Anybody would understand. Below her, the night or the sea seemed to pronounce distinctly, "Aha! I see you at last." She started, slipped, fell, and without attempting to rise, listened terrified. She heard heavy breathing, a clatter of wooden clogs. It stopped. "Where the devil did you pass?" said an invisible man hoarsely. She held her breath. She recognized the voice. She had not seen him fall. Was he pursuing her there, dead, or perhaps alive? She lost her head. She cried from the crevice where she lay huddled, "Never! Never!" "Ah, you are still there. You led me a fine dance. Wait, my beauty, I must see how you look after all this. You wait." Milot was stumbling, laughing, swearing meaninglessly out of pure satisfaction, pleased with himself for having run down that fly-by-night. As if there were such things as ghosts. Bah! It took an old African soldier to show those clodhoppers. But it was curious. Who the devil was she? Susan listened, crouching. He was coming for her, this dead man. There was no escape. What a noise he made amongst the stones. She saw his head rise up, then the shoulders. He was tall, her own man. His long arms waved about, and it was his own voice, sounding a little strange because of the scissors. She scrambled out quickly, rushed to the edge of the causeway, and turned round. The man stood still on a high stone, detaching himself in dead black on the glitter of the sky. "Where are you going to?" he called roughly. She answered, "Home," and watched him intensely. He made a striding, clumsy leap onto another boulder and stopped again, balancing himself, then said, "Well, I am going with you. It's the least I can do." She stared at him till her eyes seemed to become glowing coals that burned deep into her brain, and yet she was in mortal fear of making out the well-known features. Below her the sea lapped softly against the rock with a splash continuous and gentle. "I am coming for you. What do you think?" She trembled. Coming for her. There was no escape, no peace, no hope. She looked round despairingly. Suddenly the whole shadowy coast, the blurred islets, the heaven itself swayed about twice, then came to a rest. She closed her eyes and shouted, "Can't you wait till I am dead?" She was shaken by a furious hate for that shade that pursued her in this world, unappeased even by death in its longing for an heir that would be like other people's children. "Hey, what?" said Milot, keeping his distance prudently. He was saying to himself, "Look out, some lunatic. An accident happens soon." She went on wildly. "I want to live alone for a week, for a day. I must explain to them. I would tear you to pieces. I would kill you 20 times over rather than let you touch me while I live. How many times must I kill you, you blasphemer? Satan sends you here. I am damned too." "Come," said Milot, alarmed and conciliating. "I am perfectly alive. Oh, my God!" She had screamed, "Alive!" and at once vanished before his eyes, as if the islet itself had swerved aside from under her feet. Milot rushed forward and fell flat with his chin over the edge. Far below he saw the water whitened by her struggles, and heard one shrill cry for help that seemed to dart upwards along the perpendicular face of the rock, and soar past, straight into the high and impassive heaven. Madame Levi sat, dry-eyed, on the short grass on the hillside, with her thick legs stretched out, and her old feet turned up in their black cloth shoes. Her clogs stood nearby, and further off the umbrella lay on the withered sward like a weapon dropped from the grasp of a vanquished warrior. The Marquis of Chavannes, on horseback, one gloved hand on thigh, looked down at her as she got up laboriously with groans. On the narrow track of the seaweed carts, 4 men were carrying inland Susan's body on a hand-barrow, while several others straggled listlessly behind. Madame Levi looked after the procession. "Yes, Monsieur le Marquis," she said dispassionately in her usual calm tone of a reasonable old woman. "There are unfortunate people on this earth. I had only one child, only one, and they won't bury her in consecrated ground." Her eyes filled suddenly, and a short shower of tears rolled down the broad cheeks. She pulled the shawl close about her. The Marquis leaned slightly over in his saddle and said, "It is very sad. You have all my sympathy. I shall speak to the curé. She was unquestionably insane, and the fall was accidental. Milot says so distinctly. Good day, madame." And he trotted off, thinking to himself, "I must get this old woman appointed guardian of those idiots and administrator of the farm. It would be much better than having here one of those other bacadous, probably a Red Republican, corrupting my commune." This concludes the reading of The Idiots. The reading of The Lagoon continues immediately. The Lagoon. The white man, leaning with both arms over the roof of the little house in the stern of the boat, said to the steersman, "We will pass the night in Arsat's clearing. It is late." The Malay only grunted and went on looking fixedly at the river. The white man rested his chin on his crossed arms and gazed at the wake of the boat. At the end of the straight avenue of forests cut by the intense glitter of the river, the sun appeared unclouded and dazzling, poised low over the water that shone smoothly like a band of metal. The forests, somber and dull, stood motionless and silent on each side of the broad stream. At the foot of big, towering trees, trunkless nipa palms rose from the mud of the bank, in bunches of leaves enormous and heavy, that hung unstirring over the brown swirl of eddies. In the stillness of the air, every tree, every leaf, every bough, every tendril of creeper, and every petal of minute blossoms seemed to have been bewitched into an immobility perfect and final. Nothing moved on the river but the 8 paddles that rose, flashing regularly, dipped together with a single splash, while the steersman swept right and left with a periodic and sudden flourish of his blade, describing a glinting semicircle above his head. The churned-up water frothed alongside with a confused murmur, and the white man's canoe, advancing upstream in the short-lived disturbance of its own making, seemed to enter the portals of a land from which the very memory of motion had forever departed. The white man, turning his back upon the setting sun, looked along the empty and broad expanse of the sea-reach. For the last 3 miles of its course, the wandering, hesitating river, as if enticed irresistibly by the freedom of an open horizon, flows straight into the sea, flows straight to the east that harbors both light and darkness. Astern of the boat, the repeated call of some bird, a cry discordant and feeble, skipped along over the smooth water and lost itself before it could reach the other shore in the breathless silence of the world. The steersman dug his paddle into the stream and held hard with stiffened arms, his body thrown forward. The water gurgled aloud, and suddenly the long, straight reach seemed to pivot on its center. The forests swung in a semicircle, and the slanting beams of sunset touched the broad side of the canoe with a fiery glow, throwing the slender and distorted shadows of its crew upon the streaked glitter of the river. The white man turned to look ahead. The course of the boat had been altered at right angles to the stream, and the carved dragon head of its prow was pointing now at a gap in the fringing bushes of the bank. It glided through, brushing the overhanging twigs, and disappeared from the river like some slim and amphibious creature leaving the water for its lair in the forests. The narrow creek was like a ditch, tortuous, fabulously deep, filled with gloom under the thin strip of pure and shining blue of the heaven. Immense trees soared up, invisible behind the festooned draperies of creepers. Here and there, near the glistening blackness of the water, a twisted root of some tall tree showed amongst the tracery of small ferns, black and dull, writhing and motionless like an arrested snake. The short words of the paddlers reverberated loudly between the thick and somber walls of vegetation. Darkness oozed out from between the trees, through the tangled maze of the creepers, from behind the great fantastic and unstirring leaves, the darkness mysterious and invincible, the darkness scented and poisonous of impenetrable forests. The men poled in the shoaling water. The creek broadened, opening out into a wide sweep of a stagnant lagoon. The forests receded from the marshy bank, leaving a level strip of bright green, reedy grass to frame the reflected blueness of the sky. A fleecy pink cloud drifted high above, trailing the delicate coloring of its image under the floating leaves and the silvery blossoms of the lotus. A little house perched on high piles appeared black in the distance. Near it, 2 tall knee-bong palms that seemed to have come out of the forests in the background leaned slightly over the ragged roof with a suggestion of sad tenderness and care in the droop of their leafy and soaring heads. The steersman, pointing with his paddle, said, "Our sat is there. I see his canoe fast between the piles." The polers ran along the sides of the boat, glancing over their shoulders at the end of the day's journey. They would have preferred to spend the night somewhere else than on this lagoon of weird aspect and ghostly reputation. Moreover, they disliked Arsat, first as a stranger, and also because he who repairs a ruined house and dwells in it proclaims that he is not afraid to live among the spirits that haunt the places abandoned by mankind. Such a man can disturb the course of fate by glances or words, while his familiar ghosts are not easy to propitiate by casual wayfarers, upon whom they long to wreak the malice of their human master. White men care not for such things, being unbelievers and in league with the father of evil, who leads them unharmed through the invisible dangers of this world. To the warnings of the righteous they oppose an offensive pretense of disbelief. What is there to be done? So they thought, throwing their weight on the end of their long poles. The big canoe glided on swiftly, noiselessly, and smoothly towards Arsat's clearing, till in a great rattling of poles thrown down and the loud murmurs of Allah be praised, it came with a gentle knock against the crooked piles below the house. The boatmen, with uplifted faces, shouted discordantly, "Arsat! Oh, Arsat!" Nobody came. The white man began to climb the rude ladder giving access to the bamboo platform before the house. The juragan of the boat said sulkily, "We will cook in the sampan and sleep on the water." "Pass my blankets and the basket," said the white man curtly. He knelt on the edge of the platform to receive the bundle. Then the boat shoved off, and the white man, standing up, confronted Arsat, who had come out through the low door of his hut. He was a man young, powerful, with broad chest and muscular arms. He had nothing on but his sarong. His head was bare. His big, soft eyes stared eagerly at the white man, but his voice and demeanor were composed as he asked without any words of greeting, "Have you medicine, Tuan?" "No," said the visitor in a startled tone. "No, why? Is there sickness in the house?" "Enter and see," replied Arsat in the same calm manner, and turning short round, passed again through the small doorway. The white man, dropping his bundles, followed. In the dim light of the dwelling, he made out on a couch of bamboos a woman stretched on her back under a broad sheet of red cotton cloth. She lay still, as if dead, but her big eyes, wide open, glittered in the gloom, staring upwards at the slender rafters, motionless and unseeing. She was in a high fever and evidently unconscious. Her cheeks were sunk slightly, her lips were partly open, and on the young face there was the ominous and fixed expression, the absorbed, contemplating expression of the unconscious who are going to die. The two men stood looking down at her in silence. "Has she been long ill?" asked the traveler. "I have not slept for 5 nights," answered the Malay in a deliberate tone. "At first she heard voices calling her from the water, and struggled against me who held her. But since the sun of today rose, she hears nothing. She hears not me. She sees nothing. She sees not me. Me." He remained silent for a minute, then asked softly, "Tuan, will she die?" "I fear so," said the white man sorrowfully. He had known Arsat years ago in a far country, in times of trouble and danger, when no friendship is to be despised. And since his Malay friend had come unexpectedly to dwell in the hut on the lagoon with a strange woman, he had slept many times there in his journeys up and down the river. He liked the man who knew how to keep faith in council and how to fight without fear by the side of his white friend. He liked him not so much perhaps as a man likes his favorite dog, but still he liked him well enough to help and ask no questions, to think sometimes vaguely and hazily in the midst of his own pursuits about the lonely man and the long-haired woman with audacious face and triumphant eyes, who lived together, hidden by the forests, alone and feared. The white man came out of the hut in time to see the enormous conflagration of sunset put out by the swift and stealthy shadows that, rising like a black and impalpable vapor above the treetops, spread over the heaven, extinguishing the crimson glow of floating clouds and the red brilliance of departing daylight. In a few moments all the stars came out above the intense blackness of the earth, and the great lagoon, gleaming suddenly with reflected lights, resembled an oval patch of night sky flung down into the hopeless and abysmal night of the wilderness. The white man had some supper out of the basket, then collecting a few sticks that lay about the platform, made up a small fire, not for warmth, but for the sake of the smoke, which would keep off the mosquitoes. He wrapped himself in the blankets and sat with his back against the reed wall of the house, smoking thoughtfully. Arsat came through the doorway with noiseless steps and squatted down by the fire. The white man moved his outstretched legs a little. "She breathes," said Arsat in a low voice, anticipating the expected question. "She breathes and burns as if with a great fire. She speaks not, she hears not, and burns." He paused for a moment, then asked in a quiet, incurious tone, "Tuan, will she die?" The white man moved his shoulders uneasily and muttered in a hesitating manner, "If such is her fate." "No, Tuan," said Arsat calmly, "if such is my fate. I hear, I see, I wait, I remember. Tuan, do you remember the old days? Do you remember my brother?" "Yes," said the white man. The Malay rose suddenly and went in. The other, sitting still outside, could hear the voice in the hut. Arsat said, "Hear me! Speak!" His words were succeeded by a complete silence. "Oh, Diamelen!" he cried suddenly. After that cry there was a deep sigh. Arsat came out and sank down again in his old place. They sat in silence before the fire. There was no sound within the house, there was no sound near them, but far away on the lagoon they could hear the voices of the boatmen ringing fitful and distinct on the calm water. The fire in the bows of the sampan shone faintly in the distance with a hazy red glow. Then it died out. The voices ceased. The land and the water slept invisible, unstirring and mute. It was as though there had been nothing left in the world but the glitter of stars streaming ceaseless and vain through the black stillness of the night. The white man gazed straight before him into the darkness with wide-open eyes. The fear and fascination, the inspiration and the wonder of death near, unavoidable and unseen, soothed the unrest of his race and stirred the most indistinct, the most intimate of his thoughts. The ever-ready suspicion of evil, the gnawing suspicion that lurks in our hearts, flowed out into the stillness round him, into the stillness profound and dumb, and made it appear untrustworthy and infamous, like the placid and impenetrable mask of an unjustifiable violence. In that fleeting and powerful disturbance of his being, the earth enfolded in the starlight peace became a shadowy country of inhuman strife, a battlefield of phantoms, terrible and charming, august or ignoble, struggling ardently for the possession of our helpless hearts. An unquiet and mysterious country of inextinguishable desires and fears. A plaintive murmur rose in the night, a murmur saddening and startling, as if the great solitudes of surrounding woods had tried to whisper into his ear the wisdom of their immense and lofty indifference. Sounds hesitating and vague floated in the air round him, shaped themselves slowly into words, and at last flowed on gently in a murmuring stream of soft and monotonous sentences. He stirred like a man waking up, and changed his position slightly. Arasat, motionless and shadowy, sitting with bowed head under the stars, was speaking in a low and dreamy tone. For where can we lay down the heaviness of our trouble but in a friend's heart? A man must speak of war and of love. You, Tuan, know what war is, and you have seen me in time of danger seek death as other men seek life. A writing may be lost, a lie may be written, but what the eye has seen is truth and remains in the mind. I remember, said the white man quietly. Arasat went on with mournful composure. Therefore I shall speak to you of love, speak in the night, speak before night and love are gone, and the eye of day looks upon my sorrow and my shame, upon my blackened face, upon my burnt-up heart. A sigh, short and faint, marked an almost imperceptible pause, and then his words flowed on without a stir, without a gesture. After the time of trouble and war was over, and you went away from my country in the pursuit of your desires, which we, men of the islands, cannot understand, I and my brother became again as we had been before, the sword-bearers of the ruler. You know we were men of family, belonging to a ruling race, and more fit than any to carry on our right shoulder the emblem of power.